So if someone wanted to make a maybe not even just a big design change, just some sort of design change to the way KDE currently functions, what would be the process that they would actually go through to do that?
So they should join the VDG, which you can do through either Telegram or Matrix. There's links if you just search for the KDE VDG. And you say what you want to do. People there will tell you if that's either currently planned or being worked on. Maybe there's something that's something we want, but nobody's actually working on it. So we would be very happy to see some development. Usually we give out tips on how to do things, and then you can actually get started. There's many repositories. You pick the right one, you see the code, and I mean, you get started with a coding session.
That makes sense. Yeah. Okay. That's simple enough. I didn't think it would be a super complex system, but I personally have not been involved in the KDE project. My experience with KDE is fairly limited. I typically, like, when I set up a VM to test out something on stream, I will use GNOME because it annoys people in my chat. But if I was going to actually be using a desktop environment, I probably would at some point use KDE.
Yeah,
I had no idea how you'd actually even contribute to it.
yeah. We've actually made like many web pages trying to explain as nicely as possible, because I talked about like code changes,
Yeah.
but there's so many ways to contribute even
Mm.
without writing any sort of code. If you go to kd.org and you click with on get involved, there's a list of like 15 different things you can do. To name another one I do a lot of work in is promotion. You need somebody doing videos and like writing announcements, getting the word out, actually going to events representing KDE. And that's just another example. So we've actually written wiki pages for each of these things, also translation as an example.
Mm.
And you can just go there, read through them, and see what's more appropriate to you.
That's actually a really helpful thing to have here because I've seen a lot of projects where people don't really know how to contribute if they're not a developer. Like the Linux space has no shortage of good developers. Like there's too many of them. You don't need more developers necessarily on project. Like, they are helpful, obviously, but there are other places where they might be lacking, like especially translation. If you do know a second language, a lot of projects will appreciate someone who can actually translate it well.
Yeah. And another aspect that probably needs a lot of work and expert hands-on is accessibility,
Mm.
which is something that KDE Plasma in particular, I think, does not very a good job of. But if I were to actually work on it, I wouldn't quite know even how to
Yeah,
get
yeah.
started. So maybe writing some good guides on accessibility and stuff like that would be super helpful.
Like I can obviously think of surface level things like colorblind modes and making sure you have the correct level of contrast for different types of colorblindness and ensuring that screen readers work correctly. But that's basically as far as I personally would be able to get down something like accessibility. I'm sure there's much more that you could do about if you were someone who was specialized in that environment.
Yeah, yeah. There's probably stuff like making sure that you're able to navigate the UI through keyboard.
Mm.
That's usually brought up, and that's already quite a difficult task to achieve, sadly. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, especially with how complex a lot of UIs have gotten nowadays, coming up with a way to effectively navigate that without then also stripping down the functionality of the UI can certainly be complex.
yeah. Especially if you consider that many laptops nowadays, like mine, are touch screens, and you
Mm,
should
mm.
support that, which means that you have an application that should support mouse input, keyboard input, and touch screen input. That's not always very easy to actually achieve all of that, which is why KDE actually worked on Kirigami, which is a toolkit to make UIs that work nicely both on phones, tablets, desktops, and actually feel native, even if you're on a phone or on a desktop, and you can use whatever input method.